Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Enabler versus Disruptor, Pick Your Path. This program is proudly sponsored by P&G Ventures, Kroger, First Financial, North American Properties, Vora Ventures, and Taft. Today's webinar will have a Q&A session starting around 12:30. Please continue to keep using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. A recorded version of today's webinar will also be provided a few days after this event, and a survey will be provided after this event as well, so don't forget to fill it out on your way out. Thank you all so much for attending. I will hand it off to David Hollabaugh to get us started.
Thank you so much. And yeah, as the Q&A, even though it starts at 12:30, and we might actually end a little earlier depending on how much I go deep into some of these subjects. But just go ahead and actually, if you want, I don't know if this is possible or not, but if you throw questions along the way as we're thinking of them, then we can get to them in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. All right. Well, it's nice to virtually meet everyone. I wish I could see all the faces, but I understand with all the people on it, it's a little bit harder to do. So today I wanted to take some time to talk about enabling versus disruption, but really through the lens of kind of my own path as well. And so I'll go into each of the kind of experiences that I had, but I think it's the best context in order to talk about this discussion. And I think really as a whole, when you talk about entrepreneurship or just in general, a lot of things happen because situational effects. And so I think a lot of my career has been that way. I think a lot of successful startups, successful companies are all born based upon the situation at hand. And we are certainly in a situation right now. And so I think this is probably, I love, the way that Pete Blackshaw puts it sometimes, and some others in the area, that could be a time in which we could be scared, and we could, be a little bit hard to determine how to help, or this is just a time of so much opportunity and so much ways to help out others. And so even myself being at Kroger, I have all my creative juices flowing throughout this time because there's just so many areas to help people, to help solve problems and to create new things when they're needed the most. So I couldn't think of a better time to be having this type of conversation, this type of program. So I'm super excited to speak to all of you about it. So jumping into that, I kind of just at a high level go over definitions a little bit of enablers versus disruptors. So really just go into more stories, and then from there, just kind of want to open it up a bit. In terms of personal lessons learned, personal experiences, and how you can go down each path, but looking ahead a little bit, you can also change. So, well, having said that, we'll go right into definitions here. All right. So I'm sure that most of you, when I talk about enablers versus disruptors, most of you think of disruptors. Disruption is kind of baked into entrepreneurial thinking and entrepreneurial learning as it is right now. And so this is an area that I probably won't spend too much time on, because most of you know stories of these, most of you witness these firsthand. They're the ones that are definitely glorified in the news, rightfully so sometimes. And I think it's the thing that we think of when we think of entrepreneurs is disrupting something. And so to take the definition from the late and great Clayton Christensen, disruptive innovation helps create a new market and value network that eventually goes on to disrupt an existing market and value network. And so when you think about some of the traditional examples of it, especially ones that I grew up around, is building companies around the same time, Uber and Instacart specifically. Uber is such a great example of something that went in and created a new market and a new value network for something that disrupted somebody else. So if you think about traditional cab business, which maybe people on this call haven't really used a cab in a long time. Maybe you've never used a cab before, but there was a lot of pain points in the experience there. And there's a lot of pain points in getting a ride from point A to point B, or getting transportation from point A to point B. There's a lot of rich discussions around, mass transportation and how we improve that as a society, and especially in certain markets, but as a whole, just the ability to easily and seamlessly be able to get a ride from point A to point B that you can trust, that that it's going to be what you pay is going to be in range of what you think is valuable, is something that was just completely missing from the value network of the cabs at that time. And so Uber really came in and they decided that, not only do we want to help fill this gap, but I think from day one, they really set the stance to say that we're going to do this from a technology standpoint. And I think underlying, just conversations around disruption, but just in general, there's a lot of, ethical conversations around Uber and how they employ people and how they don't employ people. And I think that's really important, especially for future generations as you start to build things and to learn from that. But you can't deny, especially even looking at the stock prices recently, I think as the pandemic started to take off, it went down a lot, but it picked back up very quickly because Uber has always relied and said, we are a technology company. And I think by focusing in on the areas that they could provide the most value, I think they were able to find a value network where they didn't need some of the traditional capital that you would have needed in order to have a traditional transportation business. So plenty of people have started up, limousine companies or premium service ride-hailing companies, but they always relied on that capital in order to purchase the cars, to employ the drivers, things like that. And that was never part of the business model from the get-go for Uber. And they've consistently stayed on that, and that's how they've operated as a business, right? And so I think when you look at disruption, you look at things like that. You look at not only is Uber easy to use, and not only does it have network effects at this point, but really when you're starting a company, fundamentally, you have to figure out what is that new value network? What is that new value proposition? And make sure you solve that really well before you might iterate into something else. So they've always had the opportunity to iterate into something where they do actually employ people. They do have the capital now to start having those conversations. And that's a whole nother talk for a whole nother day around ethics. But I think it's important to understand that when they started the company and when they wanted to disrupt, they focused on what was important most in order to disrupt that traditional business. Second one here, I don't want to speak too much to right now because I'm going to get into it later too, but Instacart. And so when Instacart was founded, it really was the basis of, I think it was 2009 or 2012 actually, when Instacart was founded. And back then, I wasn't at Kroger at that point, but Kroger, Walmart, some of the traditional big grocery businesses didn't even really have the concept yet of grocery pickup, especially grocery delivery. And so they were disrupting a market of people getting, instead of going to the store to get groceries, they wanted to bring it to you. There was a lot of, there was other companies that existed. One great example is Peapod. I think they've existed for, 25, 30 years. I actually just recently went out of business. But the value network wasn't completely new, but the way that they had approached it from an Instacart standpoint, they built off kind of the Uber model a little bit, but also just continuing to fundamentally change the way in which you think about getting groceries and getting groceries to you. It's kind of this point now, honestly, I actually haven't been inside of the store for almost all of 2020, right? I rely completely on delivery or pickup. And so thinking about that investment 8 years ago at this point, to see that future state and to understand the outcomes that you want to change the model of how people get groceries and to be that forward thinking is something that is truly disruptive. So 2 great examples of disruption, and I'm sure that you've all learned from disruption over and over again. So I don't necessarily want to speak to that too much here, but I think it's a good basis when you're thinking about starting your companies or joining a company or just creating something new is, do you want to be this disruptor? Do you want to be this disruption? There's a lot of things that get in your way, especially when you think about customer adoption, customers doing something new. It's always a big hurdle to overcome, right? Getting groceries delivered to your house, that sounded weird, very weird in 2012. And so even now, there's obstacles to overcome, but it's become more normalized. So there's a lot of things in terms of adoptions from the customers that you really need to think about if you wanted to be a disruptor. But they tend to have kind of the bigger outcomes. They tend to have the larger valuations, right, than the enablers that I'll get to in a minute. But I think it's important to think about what you can do with enablers. And so to define enablers more, I want to go through 3 examples here. Enablers inherently are more evolutionary than revolutionary. And so enablers are trying to support existing markets or support existing value networks. It's not that they're not creating something new. It's just that they are serving an existing market or business. And traditionally, enablers really manifest in the form of B2B companies. So how can I support existing companies out there? How can I build something that Kroger might need or P&G might need? And so you definitely can still have consumer facing enablers. And that's some of the ones that I want to call out here, but you can also, there's a big market in having B2B enablers. Keep in mind though, that depending on which path you go down from that standpoint, sometimes there's much longer sales cycles which means that it's much longer validation. And validation is so critical and key with any company, especially when you're starting it. And so some examples here of enablers, especially ones that were customer facing, is Slack and Trello specifically. I was going to ask the group how many people had heard of Slack and Trello. Slack probably a lot more, but I don't know about Trello. But both of them, are massive companies. Slack at this point is IPO'd and is on the market, and is valued at several billion. And then Trello, I mean, they got acquired for, I think, almost $500 million by Atlassian. And they're very simple in terms of what they're actually trying to do. They're not saying their technology isn't simple, but what they are perceived to be solving is very simple, right? Slack is just a great example of this, because Slack, at the end of the day, there was so many communication tools that were already out there, but there was gaps in how they, how they formed and worked together in that seamless communication. And Slack at the time really wasn't even trying to solve that problem up front. Actually, if you look at the true founding and manifestation around Slack, it was a gaming company. And so the gaming company, as they started to grow, they realized that they had communication breakdowns between each other. And so they built Slack as a communication tool internally, which is just also another great story in terms of solving your problems first. If you can solve problems that you have and you love and you use, and you realize there's a market for that on top of that, that's a great way to build a business. Like, a great way to be an entrepreneur is to be able to find problems that you can feel firsthand. Because if you're the first customer, you can always have that voice of the customer. And so Slack was able to pivot from the gaming company and actually spin out Slack onto its own. And so it's been super successful ever since then. Trello is another one. I mean, it's just a simple project management Kanban board, and they've grown to have a lot of different templates and a lot of different tools. But really, at the end of the day, it was a very simple tool where it was trying to replace the sticky notes that you would have on your wall, and that you would use to collaborate and be able to move across and say, this project is here, this project is here. And so even though it was simple and easy to use, they did it in a way that the customers felt like solved their outcome the best. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that you can be an enabler like Trello and like Slack to companies and individuals, but you don't have to be a total disruptor. The last one here, DeepMind. I think this is one that, once again, maybe I'll open it up afterwards in the Q&A, see how many people have actually heard of this. But DeepMind was, even though right now they are bought by Google, they originally were started themselves too, and they were one that invested very heavily into deep learning around artificial intelligence, an area dear to my heart. And I think they found that there was a lot of applications of what they were trying to solve, that they focused in at first to be able to try and prove out what the deep learning artificial intelligence could do, and then break that out and apply it to other use cases after that. But they were one that invested a lot more in the technology up front to prove out something truly innovative. But they were always had it in an enablement type of mind. They were never trying to come along and say, we're trying to create a deep learning to beat games so that we could actually create games so we could disrupt the gaming industry. Instead, it was more of, we want to be able to learn things, and then we want to be able to have others come in and utilize that learning and pay for that learning. And so it's a great enabler that Google now has in their tool belt to be able to help companies when you think about artificial intelligence and utilizing those deep learning. So DeepMind, if you have heard of it or if you're Googling it, is one of the only deep learning AI tools that has beat an individual in Go, which is one of the hardest games out there. And so they're continuing to evolve that and trying to get it to even a much more mature state after that. But these are very sophisticated, very interesting tools that I think you should look at and not think that you have to be an Uber and an Instacart, because there's a lot of these enablement type features and functionalities that are really important. I see it's actually a chat here now too. I didn't realize I was here. So great. All right. So moving on, now we've talked a little bit about disruption and enablers. I want to talk a little bit more about how you don't have to stick to one. I think you'll see there's an overarching theme throughout all of this talk around focus and outcomes. And I think focus is very important. It's critical for Instacart upfront to be a disruptor and to disrupt how people got groceries and to try and disrupt the grocery business. But over time, they were able to grow. And you can do that with any of your companies as well. As even though you start on one, you can always move to another. And I specifically named Instacart here, as I'm going to speak about later, because we partner with them. And so when you go through Kroger, Kroger.com or through our Kroger apps, in most markets, when you choose delivery, you're actually getting that fulfilled by Instacart. And so they were a great enabler to Kroger to be able to allow us to launch a brand new service without all that capital investment, but also allow us to focus on our core competency of making sure that you have your groceries, and allow us to grow to our motto of anything, anytime, anywhere. And so as we were investing in what was our click list is now our pickup opportunity, or business line, this allowed us to bring live our delivery business. And then ever since then, it's also been a great scaling partner. If you think about everything that's going on right now in terms of the pandemic, it's allowed us to grow that business very quickly by partners with Instacart. So now they can go into major grocery and they can say, we have this capability, we have the shoppers, we have the drivers, and we proved it out. It's so valuable with customers like it. It's a great experience to the level that they can actually enable some of these large companies. So if they were to start it from day one, trying to build this for Kroger, it might have been a fundamentally different company than it is now. And so I think it's important to know that you can switch from one to the other. It's not necessarily that you're stuck into one. So what I want to go to a little bit was my personal experience. So I've been in Fortune 500 companies, kind of bookended between my startup experience, but I had the fortunate opportunity to start a couple companies, as well as join some later stage ones. So I want to speak about some of those examples. And so each of them were kind of unique in terms of what they were trying to solve and the time, and most importantly, the situational aspects and effects that were going on at the time. But each of them also kind of fit into different areas in terms of disruption and enablement. So I just wanted to kind of individually speak about these, and then as we're going through the Q&A and talking through more about it, I can go deeper into kind of what was important in understanding disruption versus enablement, how I made those decisions, or we made the decisions along the line. So Candidly was actually one of the first companies I was fortunate enough to form and help launch, and it was one of those that I was actually working at Fortune 500 company at the time, and so I had to think about nights and weekends and not wanting to give up that paycheck that was associated with a good company. But it was an idea that just captured kind of my creativity and imagination, as well as the CEO and founder at the time as well. Sam just had a passion around it, and it was a market that wasn't seeing a lot of growth, or wasn't seeing a lot of new innovation in. And so what Candidly essentially is its ability to get a personal photographer for only $30 an hour. It's meant to allow people to be in the moment more, and not necessarily be behind their cell phones when they're trying to capture an important moment in their lives, but also not necessarily hiring a $250 an hour professional photographer too. So as we were building this business, it was important for us to make this decision up front. Do we want to be an enabler to the professional photography business? Do we want to help enable professional photographers that have to charge $250, $300 an hour for weddings that are high stress, high maintenance, that have to have those costs baked in? Do we want to enable them so that they could do lower cost events, so that way they could expand their portfolio, but meanwhile still make sure that they have the margins in order to succeed as an individual business? Or do we want to disrupt that? And so I think that conversation was a lot more fluid than you would think up front. And with any type of marketplace, especially this one, but any marketplace, you have to make the decision, what do you start with, the supply or demand? And so I think a lot of successful marketplaces made the decision to start with the demand. However, for our aspect of it, and even if you think about Uber or some others around managed marketplaces, you really have to start with the supply. And so that's exactly what we did. So we went to professional photographers and we said, what do you need in order for us to enable you so that you could do these events? And they listed off certain things that were pain points that were baked in on a lot of the costs that they had to do in order to charge the premium $250, $300 an hour. And so with that, we started to build tools that could help enable that. But then during the process, we actually discovered a new type of supply, which was people that had DSLRs that were learning photographers, or semi-pros, or amateur photographers. We realized that they also needed some of these tools, but they could produce this quality of photography that you're not necessarily going to get maybe 100 good photos for the $30 an hour, but you might get 10 or 15, which already is 10 or 15 more than you might have gotten if you were trying to take photos yourself behind your phone. It also frees up a lot of time for you as a customer. So we actually were able to discover a new supply, and then we were able to enable that new supply group of these amateur photographers and help bring them to life, so that we were able to disrupt kind of that traditional professional photography market. And so a company's still around. We're not in Cincinnati anymore. But after a little bit of time with them, helping start that up, launch it in a couple different markets, I moved over to a company called Chore Monster. And so with Chore Monster, the premise of this, I joined it when it was already mid stage. And so definitely not early stage. They had just partnered with me, and they're going through Techstars LA. And so the premise of this was get kids to beg to do chores. And so this is all about gamification, behavioral modification. And so this entire market really was disruption, but just our biggest competition was really the chore chart at home. It wasn't necessarily like there was a lot of existing companies out there or existing value networks. And so what we were trying to actually do was just get inside the household a little bit more control over what was going on and help build good habits within the family, but especially within the kids. And so it was all about, getting kids to do chores, and we had silly monsters and stinky socks and farts and all that types of stuff that incentivized them to do it, but really just get them into the routines in which they could eventually actually graduate out of the app. And so it was a wildly successful app, and I was fortunate to be a part of that. And it was one of those areas that, we were disrupting how people manage their households, but it wasn't disruption in the sense of we were trying to go in and overtake another market. But I definitely, it definitely is one of those disruptive areas, because you're trying to get people to do something new that they've never done before, right? Why would I use an app to get my kid to spend less screen time? Just this cognitive dissonance, right? But it's not true. It's actually it's all about behavioral modification, instilling habits and things like that. So you definitely have to prove that out. And that's what Chore Monster had to do, is they had to prove out success with a lot of people in order to demand their respect. One last one here real quick. I know we're getting close to time here, but I got a couple more points I want to get through. Is enabler. So with Picnic Insights, this was it started off thinking about deep learning, but really we went into more machine learning. But really was just trying to help out other companies that were building software find potential failure points in what they were doing, where there might be security flaws and where there might be things that might be risk way before they went to production. And so we did that by utilizing kind of artificial intelligence more. And we knew from day one that this was going to be not only a B2B company, but this really was going to enable other people to do something better. And so this wasn't, a brand new value proposition necessarily, but it was one that was much more automated. It was something that could be approached at a much lower cost than hiring maybe a consultant to come in and do this full time for months and months and months. So that was one where we knew from the get-go that this was going to be an enabler. But as I mentioned earlier, there's some kind of faults to that too, around like the sales cycle is much longer and you have to prove out things differently. So you can't utilize network effects when you do those types of businesses. So, but having said that, once you get, a handful of customers that do really appreciate you, your business just, 10x's very quickly. And so there's probably much less focus on from a marketing standpoint and much more focus from a product standpoint. And on the disruption side, you really have to invest a lot more in people believing in what you're doing. And you have to invest in that early adoption really well in order to get that base, which will help you grow. So I can go to my own experience more a little bit later. And please continue to type in your questions here as I finish up. But I wanted to talk about how within big companies, we're also looking at disruptors and enablers, right? Kroger inherently has a lot of things that are enablers for us that we're utilizing to enable us to make sure that we have a seamless shopping experience, whether you go in store, pick up, delivery, or ship to home. But we're also investing in areas that might be more of a disruption. And so 2 examples here is Home Chef. So Home Chef was a meal kit business, and meal kits as a whole was kind of a more disruptive technology and disruptive innovation. And instead of saying that we want to build that in-house, we actually went out and had M&A with Home Chef and merged them into the company while still allowing them to have the autonomy and success that they had alone. Another one is Cluster Truck. And so that is a great example of kind of ghost kitchens and prepared meals. So how might we allow Kroger to be really good at the fresh ingredients and the fresh prepared foods that we have, but outsource that last mile, as well as that kind of in-demand or on-demand preparation to somebody else like Cluster Truck. And so those are kind of both disruptive technologies that we're partnering with other people to help us with that, right? So those companies inherently started off as disruptors and became more enablers over time too. So just want to mention that big companies are dealing with both. They're not just looking for enablers necessarily. So 4 quick things before we finish up. This last slide. I just want to say lesson learned from both sides of it. Really important. It's important to me, and you can definitely you'll hear from a lot of people over these next couple weeks, and they might say different things. But this is just my situational lessons learned. But I think they're really important. The first one is don't plan a 5-year product roadmap. That doesn't mean don't look to the future and don't think about how can I disrupt the brand new market if that's what you want to do, or from an enabler standpoint, how do I get to a P&G? But don't build a product roadmap to get there. Don't start planning the features that you think you will need in order to land those clients. I think what's really important is that you stay focused, which leads into the second part here. Stay focused on what you're building, stay focused on the market segmentation of what you're trying to succeed on, and stay focused on the outcomes. A lot of people want to build a lot of things before they launch it. I think this person needs this. I think this customer needs this. I think this customer needs this. Iterative development is really critical to success. And that's not to downplay to say you don't want a good market launch, right? You don't want to necessarily go to market with something that nobody likes, but you have to have a balance here. So say really focus on the outcomes you want to succeed on, and make sure that you are constantly iterating to get there. And just like I said, don't plan a 5-year product roadmap. I do think it is important to dream big, dream very big, whether you're disrupting or enabling. To be able to add a value to something that is existing from an enabler standpoint, and even from a disruption standpoint, you have to be 10x, right? You have to be something that is a big innovation, somebody that they will pay to use or that they will go out of the way to use, because switching from one tool or one focus area to another, even in parenting, right? The chore chart to Chore Monster, it takes investment. It takes investment from the household. It takes investment from your own cognitive load. And so make sure you dream big. This is a really important caveat here, but not of market size. I read a really great article recently that said that's the #1 thing you should take off your slide deck for investors is market size. I don't know if you should take it off, but just know that everyone understands that it's not completely vetted out, and that most good investors will know that you pretty much made up that market size based upon things that you Googled. And so I think it's really important to know that, yes, you can grow, you can have a big market size, but investors, customers, everybody, it's going to be more important than what you are doing. What is the situational effects that got you here? And leading to my 4th point, what is your solution? What is your team? Why are you uniquely situated in order to solve this problem and to grow to that market size over time, right? So I think it's really important to focus more on what's your traction? How are you solving it? What makes you unique? What makes your team unique? That's much more important than market size. Everybody will know there's a big market out there somewhere, but don't focus on it too much. And if you have to, make that the first thing that you take off your slide deck too. So I think that's about all that I wanted to cover, but it looks like there's several questions here. I'll make sure I get the sponsor slide deck up here. Let me look here and see what the first couple ones are. All right. So the first one is there a bigger risk being a disruptor rather than an enabler? That's a good question. Depends, as the answer is for a lot of things. I think that being a disruptor, you have a lot less roadblocks in your way from somebody saying, I already have a solution for this. I think when you're an enabler, Slack is a great example, right? When you're an enabler, you come along and you say, I have a new way to communicate with your team. Okay, there's a million vendors out there that have that, right? So you immediately have to get over that bottleneck of an existing value now or an existing solution out there when you're an enabler. But having said that, you know customers, like you know exactly who to target when you're an enabler. You know exactly who the purchasers are. So it's easier to get in front of them, and it's easier to have more candid conversations with them to figure out why they chose that instead of this. So that feedback loop is a lot easier. But being a disruptor, you don't have those roadblocks necessarily, but the roadblocks you do have is trying to explain something new to someone. And so sometimes that can be just as hard, if not harder. It really depends on what you're solving. I think another big piece of feedback is just if you can keep whatever your solution is very simple for somebody to try it or trial it, and let the product speak for itself. The less marketing you can do, the better in order to get I know it goes against, Pete and some other people that are really great at marketing, but I think the best product that you can have, and let people trial it out for free potentially, or trial it out, at a one-time event, whatever it may be, and let it be a great experience. That word of mouth is just, in a disruptive technology is everything. Okay, so the next question here is, how do you maintain your entrepreneurial spirit in your transition from startup to a large corporation in your current role at Kroger? Great question. I didn't put on here, but I actually started off like Great American Insurance. And so I've lived in Cincinnati most of my life, born and raised here. I've had to leave a couple times for a couple of startups. So I actually came from a big co, and jumped into the startup. And so I think coming back into Kroger, I think I kind of knew what to expect. I would actually say Kroger's just been a phenomenal company as a whole. They have a lot of startup series experience within it, and just this bias for action that you don't see in a lot of other places. And so I think it actually hasn't been that hard at Kroger. I think if you find the right large corporation, there's plenty of that type of spirit within it. But as a whole, I think it's really just making sure you stay connected to customers. And Kroger has plenty of it. And so I think that sometimes it's something that's lost within big companies. You can have your entire job potentially just be status updates to other people within companies. But if you disconnect from that and you say the customer is the most important thing, and you constantly are trying to figure out what their pain points are, is what I'm doing solving it? We have a really big focus here at Kroger around outcomes. Am I actually solving that outcome? You only find that out through quantitative data and talking to customers. And so I think that helps keep that spirit alive. What had caused you to switch for you to move out of working with startups and smaller companies into a bigger company? Really was Kroger, to be completely honest. I was actually at Centrifuge for a little while after my last startup, because I didn't know if I wanted to go into the big co or startup world, and Centrifuge had done so much for my entrepreneurial career in Cincinnati in general. I wanted to be a part of that, and it's a great company. But I think the kind of inflection point that Kroger was at within the retail environment was just too fascinating. And this was all before I think some of the dependencies of the pandemic had really started. So I'm really glad that I'm able to be here during all this and be able to help out people during these trying times. As we began to think about our problem and solution for our pitch competition, good luck on that, everybody, by the way. Don't worry about being stressful or anything. I think the more important part of a pitch is to do it over and over again. The more times you can say it to anyone, the more times they can pick it apart. Candid feedback is way more important than a good pitch. So as we begin to thinking about the pitch competition, how do we decide on being an enabler or a disruptor? What are the pros and cons of being one or the other? Is one easier to succeed? And so I can see the overarching question here. If you think one is easier to succeed than the other, it might just be because, like, as I'm going through this, if in your head you're thinking, I think I'm more enabler because I think it's going to be easier because of this and this. First off, entrepreneurship is not easy. Any direction you go down, it's going to be really, really hard. But if you are gravitating toward one versus the other, if you think your business is more one than the other, that might be because you see dominoes that are going to fall for you. Your situation, your unique solution, your unique advantage allows you to see success better. And so that just thinking about which one might be easier to succeed might answer the question for you, right? If you think an enabler and selling B2B is crazy and it doesn't make any sense to you, and you think, even though disruption sounds like it's a lot from just the name of disruption, but you see yourself successful, that's what you gravitate toward. Go for that. So I think it's really important just to understand what to you or to your team naturally gravitates you toward. And then as much as possible, I know it's really early stage, but as much talking to customers. I think customers will help you decide that. If it's something that's kind of in the middle and you don't know, like Candidly, for example, just talk to your customers and see if there's enough professional photographers that said, Candidly is going to be so impactful and solve all these problems for us, we would have built that company, right? But instead we found another market. We found another area that was added so much more value. And so we were drawn to that. So to figure out where the biggest problems are for your customers. As students prepare for the pitch competition, what should they think about, what should they think about with disruptors versus enablers when crafting their problem and trying to solve? I think everything I just said so far in terms of thinking about disruptors versus enablers. But I think some of the biggest areas are, in terms of what you're trying to solve, who are the people that are most critical needed? I know I kind of just said this it's in a different way, but I think it's really important. you always want to be solving, you always want to be a pain pill and not medicine necessarily, not a vitamin. You want to be medicine and not a vitamin. And so if some people say this kind of sounds nice and other people say, you change it and you say to somebody else, they say this is critical, that's what you should go down, right? And so if that is a company that all of a sudden says, if you enable me here, is much more impactful. If you go toward that market and you're trying to disrupt it, as a customer, I don't necessarily know if I need that. As a business, I don't necessarily know if I need that. But if you switch this and you enable me, that's going to be everything. I think about that. Think about what are the customers saying. And so typically from a disruption standpoint, you're really looking at more direct customer. So really talk to customers, people in the public more. And if you're being an enabler, typically you're more B2B. So that might just be a good delineation in terms of your business. How do you keep track of all the different photographers with Candidly while ensuring that everyone had a good experience with the photography? It was so hard. So it really was. I mean, because at the end of the day, you think about supply being so, like I said, supply and demand when you have a marketplace. Supply is so critical, just like an Uber, right? If you had bad drivers up front that would go the wrong routes, that had cars that smelled, whatever it may be, no one would have used Uber, right? And so I think having really high quality supply up front, and then making sure that you have thresholds as you expand that meet that. I think you're only as good as your weakest employee or your weakest partner. And so making sure that that quality is always there is really important when you think about how you manage things from that standpoint. All right, last question here. Based on your startup experience, what have you enjoyed the most? I think that direct connection to the customers, I think, you definitely have it at Big Co's, but when you're really trying to solve a problem for somebody, people will go out of their way to really help it. And I specifically want to kind of pivot this question a bit too, to talk about the Cincinnati startup experience in the Midwest as a whole. I think the Cincinnati startup experience was most fascinating because you could ask anybody, and I really mean anybody in Cincinnati, and not 9 times out of 10, but 39 times out of 40, you would get help. It was phenomenal. People would always go out of the way to provide feedback, to provide help, provide aid. Hey, can I introduce you to this person? I introduce you to this person. I think, when you look at some mature startup cultures, especially the Valley and things like that, do you want to get coffee is almost one of those, triggers for people, just because it's such a bad question, because I know they just want to ask you for money or feedback without anything in return. But that doesn't happen here, or it hasn't happened here yet. I think everyone just actually was willing and wanting to help because they want to see this so successful here, and they want to see this innovation happen here in the Midwest, and especially in Cincinnati. So I think that was just so rewarding from a startup standpoint. Not to say I can't go to somebody and say, what would you like most about Kroger? A lot of people have a lot of different opinions, right? But I think when you're in early stage and you're in the startup scene, you're just connected to so many people that help. Hey, that was perfect timing.
Great. Thank you so much, David.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to close us out here if we don't have any more questions. Yep, it looks like we're good to go. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, David, again, for sharing all your insights with us today. Again, the recorded version of this webinar will be available in the next few days. Students, we would love to hear your feedback. Please continue to fill out the question, like the survey that pops up on your way out. Tune back in tomorrow at 12 for our next webinar, Building Brands on the Energizing Power of Trust with Lee Radford, General Manager of P&G Ventures. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.